The story begins in New York City, where Dan is skilled at selling cars because he has a keen eye for small details that others might overlook. As a result, he earns the prestigious title of Salesman of the Month once again. Dan enjoys his uncomplicated life and is eagerly looking forward to celebrating his anniversary with his wife, Jessica. Together, they have 3 children, Kyle, Max, and Na. Unfortunately, Kyle and Max often argue, causing stress within the family. Dan is concerned about Kyle, who spends most of his time playing video games and rarely ventures outside. On the other hand, Na wants to change her college major due to her boyfriend, which worries Dan. Despite his efforts to offer guidance, his kids seem uninterested in his advice. Little does Dan know, Kyle secretly plays games at a friend's house, while Na believes she is old enough to make her own decisions. Dan and Jessica love going to the carnival every year, but Jessica craves more excitement in their lives after a thrilling roller coaster ride. During a sweet moment, Dan promises to make their outings more unpredictable. However, things take a turn for the worse when a stranger takes a photo of them without permission, posts it online, and starts bothering Dan. Despite the insults and provocation, Dan walks away, avoiding violence. Jessica, though disappointed, understands his decision. Back at home, Dan struggles with holding back his emotions. Meanwhile, Jessica finds solace in boxing and forms an unexpected friendship with her sparring partner, Gwen. Jessica confides in Gwen about feeling trapped in her current life, appreciating Dan's qualities but frustrated by his contentment. While out with their son Max, Dan notices a suspicious man watching them and reacts quickly to protect his family. Augie contacts a former colleague to help his family get new identities due to a potential threat from Dan's old boss, McCaffrey. Augie warns Dan to disappear quickly, suspecting that McCaffrey is behind the danger. However, it turns out that Dan used to be an assassin, a fact he kept hidden from his family. McCaffrey likely discovered his past due to a photo from a carnival. Dan tries to find Na at an editorial meeting, only to learn that she quit months ago. With a little persuasion, her friend reveals Na's location under the bleachers, upset about giving up on her dream. Despite this, they need to pick up her brother from the chess club. Dan is disappointed to find him at a neighbor's house with a gaming setup. Dan decides to take his kids to Vegas, claiming it's for a family trip, but he's cautious. He convinces Jessica to join them on a spontaneous adventure, despite her initial hesitations. As they prepare to leave, McCaffrey's men are already waiting for them as the bus drives away. Dan skillfully evades the pursuers, but they catch up to him a moment later. However, he still manages to maneuver around without his family suspecting a thing. It's pretty hard to get away when you're being tracked by a satellite. Dan drives into his workplace and closes the gates on the pursuers. He then lifts the car up and finds the tracker, hiding it just in time for the pursuers to miss him and his car. The family still has no idea. Dan sticks the tracker on his colleague's car and tells him to give that car a spin on the highway. The pursuers take the bait. With hours to go, his wife and kids are tweeting and posting about their trip to remain anonymous. Dan seizes everyone's phones, making it a device-free trip. The only problem is that they don't know the way to get there. At the travel agency, after another little incentive, the clerk finds them maps for their road. Their family is actually bonding for the first time in a long time. Meanwhile, McCaffrey personally sees Dan's house and is sure his family is still in the dark. One of them will slip up at some point. At the same time, while talking with his sister, a stranger recognizes Kyle from his streaming career and asks for a picture. Dan sees Kyle and the girl taking selfies and knows that McCaffrey will be on his tail soon. So he decides to continue driving to avoid being found. McCaffrey hired more men to track Dan, and he noticed 3 of them briefly. His family is asleep, and he turns on music on all of their headphones while preparing to use lethal force. His mirror is shot, but he manages to get rid of one, barely avoiding a crash and bumping into another. His family is still asleep. Honestly, his family is one of the heaviest sleepers I've seen in my life. The third guy just goes flying. After driving all night, Dan finally closes his eyes, but his family is awake half a mile away from the college his daughter wants to attend. She argues her way into seeing it, a gorgeous place with a lot of during the festivities. Jessica impresses everyone with her incredible keg stand skills. However, the main reason she wanted to visit the campus was because her boyfriend Trevor attends this college. While on a campus tour, Dan notices a German man on his phone and suspects that he might be working for McCaffrey. But Dan soon realizes his mistake when he is unexpectedly attacked by someone else. They end up fighting in the chemistry lab, and after a short scuffle, Dan manages to incapacitate his assailant. He quickly rejoins his family, and they continue on their journey. Meanwhile, Na goes to see Trevor and discovers him cheating on her. Devastated, she returns crying, but Dan teaches her a martial arts move that she uses on Trevor, making her feel better and appreciate her family even more. As they continue their road trip, the family bonds grow stronger. While Na is driving, she thanks Dan for always being there for her and considers reclaiming her editorial position at school. They eventually stop at a small motel, where the parents finally have a chance to relax and let off some steam. Jessica realizes that she has developed feelings for the spontaneous and adventurous Dan, sensing that there is something different about him. Dan calls up Augie, who is on his way to deliver their new identities, but he hasn't informed the family yet. Dan sneakily returns the stolen phone and prepares himself for the upcoming conversation. Kyle joins him, and they finally have a conversation about Kyle's passion for streaming. They decide to settle it over a game of laser tag, betting on who can get the first 3 kills. With Dan's past as an ex-assassin, it should be an easy win for him. He manages to get the first 2 tags, but Kyle retaliates with 2 of his own. In the end, Dan secures the last kill, leaving Kyle feeling a bit conned. However, this experience brings them closer together. Finally, the family arrives in Las Vegas and checks into one of the top suites in the city. But before they can fully enjoy their stay, Dan has to quickly meet with Augie downstairs. Augie hands him their new identities and a one-way flight to Vancouver, along with a generous payout. Dan prepares himself for what lies ahead. Dan plans to confess the truth to Jessica during a romantic dinner while the kids watch over Max. However, McCaffrey's men are already onto Dan's location as a popular gamer. Kyle heads to the HyperX gaming arena and even gets to meet Vaki. Despite the interruptions, Dan decides to postpone the confession and goes gambling with Jessica. When they return to check on the kids, they find dummies in their place. As they head to HyperX, they encounter McCaffrey's men. In the end, Dan reveals his past as a covert assassin to his family. When Jessica arrives, Gwen suddenly reveals her powerful side. She talks about her ex being a hypocrite, and now they understand why. Dan never wants to leave the city and is against social media, so he hands them their new identities. Now, Molly and Van are their new names. After years of lies, the family refuses to accept him. Jessica decides to leave him and take responsibility for the kids. She calls Gwen for help, while Dan is left to guard outside until morning. Despite Dan's warnings that it's not safe and McCaffrey will come after them, Jessica tells him to make it safe and stay away. A whole new life with an insufferable woman begins, and she makes friends with her, waiting for her to walk into her trap. Jessica has been conned, and McCaffrey unexpectedly shows up. McCaffrey calls Dan, showing that his family is in his captivity, arranging a meeting in an abandoned hotel. McCaffrey's henchmen are everywhere, and Dan must be flattered arriving at the penthouse. McCaffrey asks for a sarcastic hug, revealing that he's Dan's father. McCaffrey wanted Dan dead for abandoning him. But Dan managed to defeat every man sent by him. His father wants him back, offering to let his family go if Dan agrees to work for him. Dan, with no other option, agrees. The kids suddenly have a change of heart and want Jessica to protect Dan, even though they wanted to cut ties with him moments ago. Kyle childishly pushes elevator buttons, while Jessica starts changing Max's diaper and throws it in the bad guy's face, leading to his death. They decide to go get their dad back while McCaffrey makes some arrangements. Gwen uses her feminine wiles to seduce Dan back into loving her, ignoring the tech guy. The family is well aware of Dan's tactics and rushes to rescue him while he puts Gwen to sleep. The tech guy gets captured, and Dan apologizes to Jessica for keeping secrets and promises to always be truthful. He expresses his desire to be her husband and a loving father. Meanwhile, McCaffrey senses that something is amiss due to the tech guy's admiration for Kyle. Kyle tests out the drone and discovers that Dan is surprisingly skilled with technology. As the henchmen approach, Dan instructs his family to go to the roof while he handles them. Kyle acts as his eyes and ears, using the drone to spot McCaffrey's men and relay information to Dan. Despite being outnumbered, Dan skillfully deals with the henchmen. McCaffrey realizes that the drone is assisting Dan and wakes Gwen up to locate the family. Dan urges his father to call off the attack, but he ignores the plea. Despite the henchmen shooting with automatic rifles, none of them manage to hit Dan. Jessica notices the elevator going up and hides the kids, taking a shot as the elevator arrives. However, Gwen effortlessly dodges the bullet and taunts Jessica, underestimating her in hand-to-hand combat. With unwavering confidence, Kyle informs them that there are still 9 guys left. Dan takes them down one by one, proving his skills. McCaffrey, although frustrated, finally manages to shoot down the drone. Drawn in the prolonged catfight, Gwen emerges victorious by burying Jessica under a pile of rubble. McCaffrey knocks Dan down and has a clear shot, but he rambles about his weak family. Gwen corners the kids, giving Jessica the strength to lift the debris. Dan manages to disarm McCaffrey, leading to a hand-to-hand combat. Jessica picks up a bamboo stick and attempts an athletic jump, but fails. McCaffrey beats Dan and grabs a gun, but the family intervenes. Dan reconciles with his family, becoming a self-defense teacher. Jessica becomes a coach, and Kyle continues making videos. The family prepares for a trip to Stanford with Na, who becomes a famous journalist. Don't forget to subscribe and see you next time.